Let's get it on then, shall we? Mwah. Welcome to Sex on the Peach, your weekly hump day dose of everyone's favourite untalked about topic, sex. Let's get honest, let's get open, let's get comfortable, and let's get in to this week's show. Happy hump day, everyone, and welcome to your weekly dose of Sex on the Peach. I'm your host, Peach, and today we'll be talking about a topic in the sexual space that literally no one wants to address or discuss. The matter of STIs. In my opinion, it's time we turn our attitudes about STIs away from shame and disgust and towards support and education. It's a minefield of unnecessary stigma and negativity, and so having awareness and being informed is key. I actually thought I was pretty clued up on this subject, but I'm currently on another sex education course and literally only just learned of 2 STIs that I'd never even heard of before. So today, we're going to discuss the STIs themselves, how to feel safer in communication surrounding them, and as always, I'll be answering some of your questions. So, here we go. Yep, we're gonna really talk about it. So listen, it's a fine line with shades of grey, isn't it? Because yes, we want to remove the shame from STIs because they happen. And if you contract an STI, it doesn't mean that you are less deserving of the fulfilling sex life that you desire. But that also doesn't mean I'm here to say, fuck protection, let's throw caution to the wind and let's see what happens. There's a difference between shame-free and reckless, and I am not suggesting anyone do the latter. I have been very reckless myself in the past, so I am certainly not here to judge if that is the case. We need to find the line of talking about this sensitively but realistically. Yes, try your best to take the necessary precautions when you are engaging in sexual activity with another person. But if you do end up contracting an STI, it's not the end of the world. It does not mean you are dirty or shameful. Even though we're going to talk about protection today, I am certainly not going to sit here on this microphone and be preachy to you about it. Because I try not to be a hypocrite, and I have had unprotected sex many a time. As you know, I always keep it honest on here, and before I started looking at the way language is constantly used incorrectly and insensitively in the sexual space, I used to be really guilty of saying that I was lucky to have never caught one, especially having always been a promiscuous little thing. Although this was before I even knew HPV was a thing, but we'll get onto that later. Because society's general attitude is that if you've had an STI, you surely must be someone who's sleeping around, which again is nonsense and completely untrue. But that language from me just simply wasn't cool because it suggests that someone who has contracted an STI is unlucky, which is not the case. We don't say people are lucky or unlucky to have caught a cold or laryngitis or conjunctivitis in their life at some point. We accept it as a part of life and general health. Sometimes people catch infections, and if we can literally catch one from someone coughing on us on a bus, of course we can catch one from getting all up in each other's genital grill. It doesn't all of a sudden mean we are hideously irresponsible, sketty pariahs. STIs are still looked on with the tag of being embarrassing or gross, when some of them are treated and over and done with at the speed that the common cold could never compete with. You can't even take an antibiotic for a cold, and it can drag on and on and on. You can take a single dose of an antibiotic for chlamydia, and it's gone. When you get a chest infection, you could be on antibiotics for at least a week, and it can take forever to get over. But no one thinks you're a gross, diseased person because you've got a chest infection. No one thinks, God, how embarrassing for them. The difference is down to fear and shame. Let's be honest. It goes back to our education, which for the vast majority of us, especially for my fellow millennials, was practically non-existent. And STIs were purely presented to us in a fear-mongering fashion and as a way to put us off having sex at all. We weren't adequately informed, and the entire foundation of the teaching of it was rooted in shame and in fear, as the bad thing that only dirty or debauched people get. But no, for every STI, there are methods of protection, there are methods of prevention, and there are methods of treatment, just like all those other types of infection. I know it still remains an uncomfortable discussion for the vast majority of people, but until we tackle these conversations in a shame-free way, the stigma will live on. And when there is stigma attached to something, it often brings with it a lack of good resources and information, and therefore makes it even less likely that people will be able to educate themselves. I've been fairly open on my social media about the fact that Instagram hides the majority of my podcast posts because it's promoting sex in an honest and positive way. And sex as an entire topic is still considered shameful and taboo. And therefore, social media algorithms hide what might be extremely healthy and helpful information from the majority of its audience. It is unbelievably frustrating, but this whole attitude and desire to hide information are the result of a lifetime of fear and shame surrounding sex. Language towards sex has, for the longest time, been used to confuse people or frighten them or shame them. And now we live in a world where positive, open, healthy, different attitudes towards it are deemed unacceptable because, God forbid, we teach people critical thinking when it comes to something that affects their entire adult life and relationships in one way or another. Society doesn't want us to have that information. They don't want people to feel so informed that they have freedom to make whatever fucking decision really feels right for them and feel okay with it. Society wants us to be scared and shamed. And it also wants us to not even realize that that's what's happening to us. Well, sorry, no, not here and not today. They can keep hiding me, but peek-a-fucking-boo, I'm still here and I'm still going to keep talking. Anyway, I digress. Yes, the shame surrounding the STI conversation means that the access to healthy, positive, informative resources is limited because we are supposed to fear them. We all know that I'm a language obsessive in general, but focusing on the language used around STIs is key and absolutely an imperative piece of the puzzle, because what we can do with that language can help stop the stigma around them. And it's one of the ways we can start to shift society into a more sex-positive space. The way things are spoken about from the get-go is what gives them their power and their meaning. And if shame and fear are removed from the conversations about sex and STIs, then they stop being shameful and scary. That might come across as incredibly simple. Hell, it might even seem a bit reductive when we are talking about something that has affected people since day dot. But if STIs were spoken about from a medical, factual point of view in the first place, without someone adding in their own moral opinions on the subject, we would never have ended up here. This isn't a conversation for morality. It's a conversation for facts and science. STIs are not something only sluts get. STIs are very, very common. So, here are some facts. More than 500 million people are estimated to have genital herpes. 50% of sexually active people will have had at least one STI by the age of 25. More than 1 million sexually transmitted infections are acquired every day worldwide. Every year, there are 374 million new infections of chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, and trichomoniasis. So, if you have contracted an STI at some point in your life, you are most certainly not alone. You are in a huge amount of company. You just won't be talking about it. And again, the less people that talk about it in a comfortable and shame-free way, the less likely we all are to be seeking out information because we're scared of what we might read and then feel even worse about it. But realistically, the more we know about infections, about our bodies in general, how to communicate about these things, how to know what we feel comfortable with, the more confident and empowered we are all going to feel navigating sex in general, rather than navigating it via the terms society has imposed on us. Again, relaying the fact that STIs are this common is not me telling you to go out, have a free-for-all, and fuck protection. It's not me saying that STIs aren't harmful, because they can be, and they need to be treated medically and scientifically as such. Taking the shame out of something doesn't have to mean you're encouraging people to go out and purposely do something that could medically affect them in a negative way. Even though HIV is now extremely treatable and manageable, it's still an infection that needs to be taken seriously. But stigma isn't going to be the thing that stops people getting STIs. Information and education are the things that are going to do that. STIs are a medical issue. They aren't a statement on someone's character, and so making someone feel like shit for getting one is neither helpful, productive, or even coming from a place of fact. Shame and fear also cause people to be too scared to get checked for STIs because of the terror of the label associated if they do end up with a positive test, which means people aren't able to take care of themselves if they have contracted something. For most women and vulva owners, the fear of being labelled a slut meant that visits to the gynecologist weren't happening until the symptoms were impossible to ignore, which means the infection may have gotten worse also. These stigmas are literally affecting your health. And let's take a moment for the fact that as a woman or vulva owner, we live in a society where you're expected to deny your freedom of your own sexuality for fear of being labelled as unworthy or of less value, yet also taught our sexuality is our value. Make it make sense. It's patriarchal, societal, systematic violence, and it's time to smash it to pieces. Words like clean and dirty are for your laundry, not for your sexual past, present, and future. So, let's talk about the most common STIs people may encounter at some point in their lives. These can be broken down into categories of bacterial, viral, and parasitic. This may get a little sciencey and for some people boring, so I apologise for that in advance, but it is what it is. The current most common STI is HPV, or human papillomavirus, which affected more than 75% of sexually active people before the HPV vaccine was made available. HPV is a complex STI because there are many, many different strains, and the majority of which show no symptoms whatsoever. However, a few strains of HPV can lead to what we might have formerly called genital warts. This isn't an STI that is cured as such, but it can be treated, and also sometimes resolve itself on its own. There is now a vaccine available for those aged 11 to 26 and for some people up to the age of 45. It is usually diagnosed for women and cervix owners during a smear test, which is how I found out I had it at one point. Although, as mentioned, it can resolve itself on its own, which was the case for me, as after my next smear test a year later, it seemed to have disappeared, and apparently there are now no signs of it. So that was that. But this is definitely the time to remind all my women and cervix owners out there to please get your smear tests done. It's important. So please book your appointments and go. Chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis are all bacterial infections that can be treated with antibiotics, as is trichomoniasis, one that I was not aware of until my sex ed course, which is actually a parasitic STI but can also be treated with antibiotics. Chlamydia, being the most common of these, can quite often be asymptomatic, as can gonorrhea, which is becoming increasingly more common and also resistant to some antibiotics. However, symptoms for both of these can include pain when urinating, pain and or bleeding during or after sex for women and vulva owners, painful swollen testicles for men and penis owners, and sometimes an unusual discharge from a vagina or penis. But because they can so commonly exist without symptoms, chlamydia and gonorrhea require regular testing to be made aware of the presence of them or not, because without treatment, they can affect fertility in the long run. They are treated very swiftly with antibiotics, so if you do find that you test positively for either of these, don't stress. Just get your antibiotics going and be on your way, as you would with any other bacterial infection. Trichomoniasis has similar symptoms to the above, but may also cause the need to urinate more frequently if you're a man or penis owner, or cause soreness and itching to women and vulva owners. Even though this is a parasitic infection, it is also treated with a week-long course of antibiotics and is often diagnosed after an examination of the genitals and a swab test. Complications of trichomoniasis are rare. However, if you are infected whilst pregnant, it could cause a baby to be born with a low birth weight or prematurely. The last of the bacterial infections is syphilis, which is actually still incredibly common, even though we think of it as an infection of the past. The symptoms for syphilis are a lot more obvious than those of the other bacterial infections, as a sore or ulcer will appear at the point of infection, which could then develop into a flu-like illness. If syphilis is left untreated, it can become quite serious and cause some long-term, potentially life-threatening health problems. So, do your tests, stay on top of it, because for something that is treated with antibiotics, it's certainly not worth leaving yourself in the dark and letting it develop into something more serious. The other parasitic infection out there that we don't hear of as much anymore, but yes, it still exists, is pubic lice. This is an external infection and one that is fairly easily noticed because, as with your hair on your head, you can literally see the lice or eggs and it will be very, very itchy. This won't be something you'll want to let go on for too long and is literally sorted with a lotion from your chemist, and you'll need to wash all associated clothing and bedding. Now, let's talk about the viral infections. For both of these that we're going to talk about, there isn't a cure as such, but there is treatment to make them completely manageable and even undetectable in some cases. First, let's talk about herpes. And I'd like to say at this point that the account @SafeSlut on Instagram is an incredible account, producing amazing content to make the conversation around herpes and your sex life a safe, open, and non-judgmental space. So if you are someone who is herpes positive, I can only recommend you follow them immediately. But yes, herpes simplex or HSV is a viral infection that can cause genital and oral herpes. And a lot of people live with HSV that is asymptomatic, so they will never actually have an active episode of herpes. For those that do, this may come in the form of small blisters or sores, which, whilst they most commonly appear on the genitals or the mouth, they can actually show up on other parts of your body also. There's a lot of stigma around herpes, but it is a very common virus. And as with every other STI, not something that anyone needs to feel ashamed of. HSV1 and HSV2 relate to the two main types of herpes simplex, one being primarily oral and two being primarily in the genital region. But they can both be transmitted through oral or genital contact. HSV is mostly transmitted through skin-on-skin contact or sharing sex toys during a sexual encounter. And even though you have a higher chance of contracting HSV2 by having sex without a barrier method protection, sometimes those methods don't cover the infection site for a partner who may experience sores on another part of their body, such as their inner thighs. If you feel like you may have a sore or a blister that could be a symptom of HSV, a doctor will be able to examine and swab this for testing. General STI tests don't include a test for herpes, so you will need to look to get tested for this specifically or take a blood test to determine if you have HSV antibodies. Even though there isn't a cure as such for HSV, antiviral medication can be prescribed to reduce any active episodes and ease any symptoms. These medications also help lower the chance of transmitting HSV during an active episode or shedding it, which refers to the body producing particles of the virus that you can transmit to others. There are also multiple home remedies to help ease any discomfort or pain from the blisters themselves, which range from compresses to essential oils. Even though people can go for years without experiencing an active episode of HSV, it is imperative to have conversations with any and all sexual partners about it, which we will get into shortly. But this is not a diagnosis to be ashamed of and should not have a negative impact on your dating and sex life. If this news is received negatively from someone, then they might be someone you don't need to be having sex with until they're maybe willing to educate themselves further on the topic. And lastly, HIV and AIDS. HIV stands for Human Immunodeficiency Virus and AIDS for Acquired Immunodeficiency Syndrome, which is the most advanced stage of the HIV infection. HIV is a completely different situation than it even was 10 years ago and has become manageable to the point where a person's viral load can get to an undetectable level, which means the level of HIV in the blood is too low to be detected and also means there is effectively no risk of transmitting HIV to a partner through sex. People are living full, healthy lives with HIV now, whereas this infection was once considered a death sentence. I cannot recommend watching the TV show It's a Sin more for an insight into the history of HIV and AIDS. HIV attacks the CD4 cells in the immune system. These are the cells that fight infection, which leaves a person's immune system vulnerable and unable to fight off certain other infections. HIV is transmitted through bodily fluids, which can include semen, blood, vaginal fluids, rectal fluids, and breast milk, and mostly occurs during anal or vaginal penetrative sex without a barrier method of protection or sharing a needle or syringe. You cannot catch HIV by hugging or holding hands or sharing objects like a toilet seat, but the amount of misinformation about how this infection is spread is absolute wildfire. People are now able to access an HIV prevention method called PrEP, which involves taking specific HIV medication every day and is an option for people who are at high risk of becoming infected. HIV medicines can also be given to women with HIV during pregnancy to prevent perinatal transmission, which can occur through childbirth or breastfeeding. The symptoms for HIV are really, in my opinion, quite vague because it ranges from flu-like symptoms to mouth ulcers. So if you think you are at risk of having caught it, get tested sooner than later. If you are diagnosed with HIV, antiretroviral therapy, or ART, is a combination of HIV medicines that you will be prescribed and will be taken daily. This will prevent HIV from multiplying and protect the immune system. And as mentioned before, sometimes reduce that viral load to an undetectable level. Without treatment, HIV can advance to AIDS in about 10 years or longer. But as with everything, this timeline will differ for each individual person. So there we go. The facts for the STIs that you may encounter at some point in your life. If you switched off for a bit because science isn't really your jam, welcome back. And for those still with me, I hope that may have been helpful or informative for you in one way or another. Whilst there are many forms of contraception, the only form of protection that helps prevent STIs is a barrier method, like condoms. There are even barrier methods to help with oral sex called dental dams, although it's not something I have ever used. And if anyone has any experience or success with them, please do let me know. Do not let people tell you that the best way to avoid an STI is to limit the number of people you have sex with. Fuck off, fuck all the way off. You can have sex with however many people you want and still keep things safe. Other ways to do this are to talk with your sexual partners openly and honestly about it. I know that's potentially uncomfortable, but it is absolutely necessary. And I'm hoping when we get onto this shortly that you might feel more equipped to have that conversation more confidently. And also, a great way to stay safe is to get regularly tested. If you and your sexual partner or partners are doing this and you are aware of each other's sexual diagnoses, then you're all good to make the decisions you need to for your sex life with each other that day, that week, that month. If you are having very casual sex on a more one-night stand basis, or if you are having sex whilst under the influence of alcohol or drugs, these conversations may not feel viable or accessible to you. And in those situations, I would highly recommend prioritizing the use of a condom or barrier method protection. And if someone refuses to adhere to that, then I'm going to suggest maybe they aren't someone you want to be having sex with in the first place. Now, let's talk about the chat. Because the thought of talking about STIs with a partner makes the vast majority of people feel like running into the abyss and not looking back. And it doesn't have to be this way. Breathe and just know it's going to be okay. With any current or intended partners, I would recommend a face-to-face conversation. And in an ideal world, this will be received with understanding and also gratitude that you are prioritizing the health of both of you. But there may be a little pushback if someone feels a little scared or confused about what that might mean for them. And that's something that can be helped if you go into the conversation having done your own research on your diagnosis. If you're contacting a previous partner about a diagnosis, this may be something that is more likely done by text or call. But no matter what the deal is with the person you're telling or contacting, hopefully this may help a little bit. Whoever you are telling, people will have questions. So just as mentioned, the more information you have before the conversation, the more helpful it will be. You will feel more confident in relaying information about treatment, timelines, symptoms, and transmission. We all feel more comfortable and confident going into a discussion when we feel well-researched and informed on the subject. And that's absolutely going to be the case here. And feel free to share the resources that you used to learn yourself with your partner or partners so that they have their own access to them also. Now, this is really important. Pick the right time and place. If you are disclosing a specific STI status to a partner or intended sexual partner, this is not to be done at a time when someone is under the influence of alcohol or drugs. People are not always capable of making coherent decisions in the same way they are whilst sober. And so to disclose this kind of information at a time like this isn't an honest form of consent and should not be taken as such. I know that in the moment impulses can feel all-consuming, but this is a conversation that should happen while sober, with a clear head and your clothes on. It's not fair to present someone with information that may affect their sexual practice or health in any way, whilst in a compromised mindset or position. And you don't want to find yourself in a situation where your sexual partner has no recollection of the conversation the following morning, and therefore may have some serious concerns towards their real consent in the moment. So, for a fully consensual conversation about an STI status, find a safe and comfortable time for you both. Find a space that you can talk privately and without interruption. And if you do find that someone gets upset or confused, please try not to take it personally, because it's our shitty sex education and societal stigmas that just won't take themselves out with the trash that are to blame. And with calm conversation, most people who care about and respect you will want to listen and understand the facts of the matter. Make it a space available for that other person to ask those questions, and keep it factual, because every STI is either treatable or manageable. If this is a first-time partner, you have the space to bring it up as a mutual conversation, because it is perfectly okay to ask someone's STI status and converse about it before embarking on a sexual journey with them. Just let them know you'd like to talk about it, and let them know what's going on, and let them know it's something you thought they should know before you potentially take things any further. Let them ask questions and give them the facts. We can't control other people, so how they feel about it is something that will be out of your hands. But you can control your own actions, and this conversation is imperative. Telling a previous partner probably feels about as comfortable as brushing your teeth with a toilet brush, but you do have a responsibility to do it. There's no need to get into anything with that partner other than to deliver the facts and keep the conversation on topic. Let them know what you've been diagnosed with, and let them know it's recommended that they get tested also. It doesn't really need to go any further than that, and try not to worry about it too much. Easier said than done, I know, but there isn't really another way around it. And not telling people just isn't a respectful option. Now, if you're diagnosed with an STI during a relationship, this is of course a tricky area. And how tricky that is will be extremely circumstantial. It is, of course, hugely possible that someone only has mild symptoms or maybe none at all, and therefore contracted an infection before they entered into a relationship and just weren't aware. Don't just jump to the assumption that someone has cheated and go into a conversation about this with anger. I would hope in an ideal situation that the fact you are getting tested has been previously discussed, and therefore the conversation won't come as too much of a shock. But at this point, whatever has come before, open and transparent communication is key, because this is something you are looking at dealing with as a team. Let them know you care about them and you care about your sex life together, and then let them know the facts. There are a lot of conversations to be had in the sexual space that can be helped with some sugarcoating. But when we're dealing with health, a lot of the time, it's mostly best to just keep the conversation fact-based and information-based. Look at what you need to do as a couple in terms of treatment, protection moving forward, or even if you need to take a moment to refrain from sexual activity altogether. And if you aren't having the testing conversation with your partner, there's no better time to start. Maybe you've been having sex for a while and you're considering stopping using a barrier method of protection. Or maybe you are someone who personally goes for routine STI tests and aren't sure if your partner does. It's perfectly okay to say to a partner, hey, if we're going to stop using condoms, I'd really like us to both get tested to be safe. Or let them know that you're going to go for your own STI test and ask that you both get tested together. Realistically, any partner in a relationship with a partner they respect should not show resistance to something that revolves around their own and their partner's health. And it's not something that should be taken as an insult. It's perfectly acceptable for people to care about sexual health, and it shouldn't be seen as anything other than that. I know these conversations won't feel fun, but by having these conversations and letting them happen comfortably and confidently, we A, begin to break the stigma, and B, break the chain of infection. It doesn't have to be a whole event. Sex is a normal part of life. STIs are incredibly common, and there is nothing shameful or embarrassing about wanting to protect your partner or yourself. I personally get tested a few times a year, which may be unnecessary, but also, why not? It's a good idea to look at regular testing if you are sexually active. It's as simple as that. If you're about to have sex with someone new, if you have multiple partners, if you find out a partner has been unfaithful, if you and a partner are looking at giving up the condoms, or you feel like you might have a symptom. All of these are reasons to look at getting tested. And even if you're in a long-term monogamous relationship, it's perfectly okay to look at getting tested once a year. It's okay to care about health, and this is literally all this is. Have all the information that you can before you go in. Take a breath and go for it. Okay, it's time to get into some of your questions for this week. Here we go. Number 1. How do I ask a guy I've been on 4 dates with if he's been tested recently before we have sex for the first time? We've talked about previous dating history, but I get the sense he finds it awkward, but I want to be safe. First of all, hopefully, as you will have picked up from the episode thus far, know that you are completely valid to want to have this conversation. It's important, and don't let yourself feel like you shouldn't have it just because it might feel awkward. Because often the reason people don't have this conversation is because they are worried about offending the other person. But if someone responds to a question about getting tested defensively, it's not the best sign. However, obviously, as with everything, there are better and worse ways to have a conversation. And as it's a new partner, as I quite often recommend with sexual or relationship conversations, you can make it a we situation. You could let them know that you want to make sure you're both on the same page when it comes to testing and protection, and suggest that you both get tested before anything goes any further. And therefore, that partner will hopefully feel like you're in it together rather than being judged independently. Also, the other party should be grateful that you care about sexual health and that you're taking theirs into consideration. So he should really only see this conversation as a positive step in your potential sexual future together. And ideally, everyone is having a conversation about STIs before sex with any new partners, although this is very often not the case. People believe that conversation about STIs is an immediate accusation, but that's rooted in cultural bias and societal bullshit. You aren't accusing someone of being promiscuous or dishonest for asking them to be upfront about their STI status. As we've already talked about, anyone can catch an STI, and most of them don't even come with symptoms. It's probably best to have the conversation in a non-sexual context. And even though I always try to encourage people to feel confident in their communication, that is something that I know can take time and also can take a lot of communication to get there. So you're also fine to acknowledge that it's a conversation that may feel a little awkward or that you feel a little nervous. But realistically, if you're looking to have this conversation before you have sex together, it's perfectly okay to make this a non-negotiable. And if someone is too defensive or resistant to this, they may not be the best partner for you, because sexual health needs to be an open space for people in a sexual relationship. So I would suggest making it something you tackle as a team and see how the conversation goes that way. Hopefully, you may feel connected by it rather than separated. Next question. I only found out my partner was cheating on me because I tested positive for chlamydia and found out she'd slept with someone else. I want to move past it, but the total disregard for my health just feels like a betrayal. Do you have any advice? I'm sorry to hear that this is something you're going through, and yes, I can understand that this is a painful situation to be in. But as you've said, you want to move past it, and that is something that is absolutely possible, but it will take time and patience from both parties. There has been a betrayal, and so the fact that it feels like one is, of course, completely valid. I suppose I don't know the details of whether your partner knew they had contracted chlamydia and kept it from you, or whether they were unaware, because that will also make a difference when it comes to your trust being fractured. Unfortunately, there aren't any miracle solutions to a situation like this, just time and communication. When things like this happen, it's completely natural for our emotions to be all over the place, cycling through anger, denial, upset, and around and around and around again. And it's perfectly okay to allow yourself to feel all of those things. If you are choosing to move forward as a team, there will need to be a safe and open space to communicate exactly how you are feeling. And the same goes for your partner. So if you're feeling angry, tell them you're angry. If you're feeling upset, tell them you're upset. The more you communicate how you're feeling, the more it will feel like a problem shared between the two of you that you're working through as a team, rather than feeling like you have to suffer any of it in silence, which will only breed resentment, and that is never a healthy or helpful space to sit in. Let them know that the disregard for your health feels like the overwhelming part of the betrayal. Open that space for communication. It's important that they know how important and upsetting that part of this has been for you. It's important for partners to take our feelings on our health seriously. I promise that it is possible to move past cheating and create an even stronger bond and connection. And even though the event can't be deleted, there will come a time when you won't feel a deep emotional pain attached to the memory or thought of this. But that is only curated by the two of you working together, talking about it, having respect for each other's feelings, and allowing each other the space to be honest. That's how you curate an environment of understanding and start to rebuild trust. So my main advice, as with most issues, is of course, talk about it. Don't feel afraid to have these conversations. I think when we decide to move past something, we think it means we can never bring it up again, because that means we haven't forgiven or we aren't over it. But human emotions are complex, and it's not healthy to shut a door on something that just needs a simple conversation. I would ask to have a discussion with your partner, if you haven't already, and lay out with complete honesty exactly how this situation has made you feel. Because also, if your partner doesn't know how you really feel about the situation, they might not be able to find the right way to be there for you through it. So it's okay to lay out your boundaries as you move through this difficult period. That may be as simple as requesting that you both get tested together regularly from now on, because your sexual health is important and you want to stay on top of it, both as an individual and as a team. It's okay to continue to express your feelings as and when they change. And it's also okay for your partner to communicate those back. Because as you are deciding to move past this, it's important that you view your relationship as a partnership who are looking at a difficult situation and deciding to tackle it together. I really wish you the best and hope that this starts to feel easier soon. I'm here for you, and just keep talking about it. Not so much a question as an anecdote, but I think your listeners would be intrigued to know that it's possible to get an STI from oral alone. I actually had to explain to my own mother that I was on antibiotics for gonorrhea of the throat from a blowjob, and she was so confused. Yes, it is absolutely possible to contract an STI from oral sex alone. In fact, it's one of the ways STIs are most frequently passed on, and gonorrhea is one of the most commonly caught STIs through oral sex, alongside herpes or HSV1, syphilis, and HPV. You are less likely to catch chlamydia and HIV through oral sex, however. As I previously mentioned, I know that sometimes people use dental dams to cover either a vulva or the anus during oral sex, which is something I haven't ever used, but it is something that's available to people if they want to try it and feel like they require that protection during oral sex. And of course, condoms can be used during oral sex on a penis. Obviously, the taste of a condom might not be for everyone, not everyone's favourite flavour, so you could look into specifically flavoured condoms or a flavoured lube to help with that. I believe that gonorrhea of the throat literally just presents itself as a sore throat, if at all, because it can be completely asymptomatic, but it is treated with antibiotics just as genital or rectal gonorrhea is. I'm sorry, Mum. I hope that she was understanding, but yes, absolutely, y'all. It can happen in your mouth as much as it can happen between your legs. Is it true you can get thrush or UTIs from sitting on a toilet seat or cold surface? No, I don't believe you can. I'm definitely not a medical doctor, but from what I know, thrush thrives in warm environments, so you could get thrush or a yeast infection from sitting, but that would be more likely if you were sitting around in a wet bathing suit or sweaty, tight clothes after a gym session, not if you were sitting on a cold surface. And the same will go for a UTI. in that you can't get one from sitting on a cold surface. Obviously, when we're cold, our blood vessels constrict and you may feel a bit of irritation while sitting on a cold seat, but you won't be causing any UTIs. I believe there used to be a myth that you could catch piles or hemorrhoids from sitting on cold surfaces, but this has also been debunked. So if sitting on cold surfaces is your jam, feel free to do so without worrying too much that it's going to cause any real damage to your nether regions. My dad actually thought I was going to die when he found out I had chlamydia back when I was 20. Do you have any advice on how to talk to your parents about STIs? As much as I relentlessly express my disapproval for my generation's sex education, there was even less so in our parents' generation. So we have to take that into consideration when having those conversations, as we have to hope it comes from a lack of knowledge over anything else. For some people, it's very easy to talk to their parents about sex. I know that my mum would be very open to a conversation about sexual health with me, but my dad, I don't know that I could ever. So I understand your dilemma. And I also think the focus is so often how to talk to your children about sex that we never even once had the discussion of how to talk to our parents about it. I think it will be important to have a conversation with them to let them know how times have moved on and that STIs don't need to be the shame-filled nightmare we've been brought up to believe they are, and that every STI we're likely to come across is treatable or manageable. When it comes to infections such as chlamydia, the more we can put it in the context of a bacterial infection that we can contract in other parts of our body, the more relatable they may find it. Strep throat is another bacterial infection that we can easily catch from another person and is easily cured by antibiotics. And a bacterial STI is absolutely no different. So it's just putting it into terms that they may find more palatable. If it's important to you to have a conversation with your parents about STIs in general, ask to put aside some time. Let them know it's important to you. And also find the resources, be it books or articles or even social media accounts that you find helpful and informative when it comes to the topic, and use them as aids in your conversation. Sometimes when people have come from a completely different generation with a completely different education, they may not be on board straight away, because it's not just a case of learning something new, it's a case of unlearning something they think they've known this entire time. So I think we can exhibit a level of patience and tolerance when we are having these conversations. But as I've also said on other topics, when we have such a huge wealth of information these days, there's no excuse for remaining ignorant. So these conversations are important, and the only way we can continue to move forward into a more open-minded society. So good on you for wanting to have that conversation with your parents and to broaden their understanding on the topic. Also, ask them what they already know or think they know and take it from there. As I've mentioned, it's a matter of science and medicine. So it's a conversation that can absolutely be led by facts and data and doesn't need to sit in a particularly emotional place. And you can use resources to back all of that up. I really hope that having these conversations helps them feel more informed and relaxed on the topic. But yes, it's definitely time to reassure Dad that chlamydia certainly isn't a death sentence. Last question today. A few years ago, I contracted herpes, and it took me 8 months to not be repulsed by myself and finally have a wank. I'm now in a happy relationship. My partner also has herpes, not from me, but I'm still pretty freaked out by the whole thing. We've talked about it and it's all out in the open, but it's primarily affecting my desire to give or receive oral, which is absolutely shit because I love both. but I can't turn my brain off enough to stop it screaming, "You're going to give her herpes," whenever I get vaguely near groin. Part of me thinks, just dive in, literally, but I don't want to do that and freak out halfway through and make her feel horrible. That is a conversation we've had and have concluded that would be worse than not even trying. How do I basically get over my irrational fear and get back to loving oral? Our sex life is otherwise good, but I want that bit back. First of all, I'm so sorry that we live in a world that meant you felt like that about yourself when you first received the news of your diagnosis. I hate that people are made to feel that way. And I'm glad you've moved past those initial feelings and feel a bit more back to yourself. You have no reason to feel repulsed and are as deserving of the sex life you want as you were before you contracted herpes. In terms of your relationship, I'm really glad that the two of you have had open conversations about this and that it isn't a silent topic that you're both avoiding. That's really great. If the two of you have concluded that for your dynamic, you'd rather not try at all than try and have something feel uncomfortable, then of course, that's your prerogative and you have to do what feels right for you. Me personally, I think I would feel and actually suggest the opposite. Because sometimes we have to work through some less than sexy things together as a means to an end. I would say if your partner is aware of how you feel, but also aware that you want to do this, then you're already sitting in a very safe and communicative space. And therefore, if you were to try it and it didn't go exactly as planned, it wouldn't be the end of the world because all of the information is already out in the open. And therefore, everyone involved knows this is something that could potentially happen. As I've mentioned a couple of times on this episode already, to get used to being a part of oral sex again without the fear of skin-on-skin contact, you could try using a dental dam as a barrier method. I just have no idea how they feel, so I can't give a recommendation that they feel great because I just don't know. But they are there for a reason, and therefore that might be a good place to start and build from there. When neither of you are in an active period of HSV, it is safe for the two of you to engage in oral sex. So even just from a place of science, just know that you're okay. The fact you're already communicating is amazing. And beyond that, it may well be a case of feel the fear and do it anyway. Because all fear does the majority of the time is hold us back. No, the first time you engage in oral activity may not be the best you've ever had. And it will take some time to build it back up again. And it's also something special for your partner and yourself because it's a goal you're working towards as a team. So maybe just discuss trying some oral activity. Not necessarily with the view to achieving orgasm, but just for a few minutes to get back into it and build up from there. You might find that when you're actually back down there, you think, hey, this is great. I have nothing to worry about. Sometimes we can snap out of a fear, and sometimes it can take some time to move past. But I would say that the only way out of this one is through. So really, it's just about finding the right time to take that first step. That's always the hardest part. So as you've said yourself, it might just be time to dive back in. And with my live by the oral, die by the oral motto, I have a feeling that when you do get back into it, it's going to be more than worth it. You've got this. Okay, so a lot of information today. And I can only hope that it has helped anyone who maybe felt unsure or uncomfortable about the conversation around STIs. Whatever your personal status is, I got you. You deserve the sex life you want and desire. No one is clean or dirty or shameful or loose. We are sexual beings. STIs are a part of life, and sometimes they happen. And when they do, we forge a calm, communicative, and respectful path forward. It won't seem as simple as that because the world has us convinced that we are the walking sexual devil if we catch anything, but it's bullshit, and it really is as simple as that. I hope that this episode has maybe helped people feel more equipped to have those conversations, whether you are embarking on a new sexual relationship or already established in one. And also helped everyone see just how common STIs are and how desperately we need to remove the shame and the stigma from the discussion. You're all safe here at Sex on the Peach. You know where I am if you need me for any follow-up questions. But until next week, thanks for coming. Thank you for tuning in to Sex on the Peach today, and I hope that you enjoyed this week's episode. You can find and follow me on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Sex on the Peach Cast, and you can also get in touch with me at sexonthepeachcast@gmail.com. Please do continue to like, share, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts, and I'll see you next week. Love, Peach.